Howdy, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Follow the Leader. I'm your host, Lee Larson, and I am so excited to introduce y'all. If you haven't already, don't know the man, the myth, the legend, Sam Forstag.
Everybody. Thanks
Uh,
for having me, Lee.
Absolutely, Sam. So Sam is running for Congress here in Montana, '01, over there on the western side of the divide. He's out of Missoula, and Sam running is a call. What has inspired you to throw your name in the ring?
Well, until a couple of months ago, I worked at the Smokejumper base in Missoula, and I was vice president of our union's local. And it's probably not news to a lot of people that
Mhm.
there were a whole lot of cuts and attacks on federal employees over the last year. Last year alone, we lost about a quarter of the Forest Service here in Montana. A lot of those are my coworkers. A lot of those are my members. And in the course of all that, I couldn't even get a darn meeting with our representative, Ryan Zinke. So after trying that many times and after losing about a quarter of these people and a lot of heartbreaking stories, I decided that if he's going to come take my coworkers' jobs, well, I'm going to come take his. And that's a lot of what this is all about.
Absolutely. So, talk a little bit about that background specifically. Working for the Forest Service, working in fire. Talk to us. How did you get into that role?
Well, I graduated the University of Montana in Missoula in 2017. And the entire time I had been in school, I was working 2 to 3 jobs at a time and still ended up graduating with a whole lot of debt. And I figured, well, I'll go work a season or two of wild and fire, get myself out of debt. And after my first season, I heard about smoke jumping and that you could get paid to jump out of airplanes from 3,000 feet onto public lands and decided I had to do it long enough for that. It took me 4 seasons of fire to get picked up by a jump base as a rookie candidate. And once you go through the hell of rookie training, you got to stick around a little bit longer and make it worthwhile. Frankly, if the world were not as it is, I would still be doing that job because
Yeah.
it's the best job I ever had. But circumstances intervened, and here we are.
We talk about right now. In fact, a few days ago, I was talking with another creator because she's down in Oklahoma, and it's been dry for them too.
Mhm.
Seeing a lot of fires now, and I'm sure we'll see it this summer. Where has your smoke jumping taken you?
I've had the luck of jumping fires in 8 states, I believe. I mean, everywhere from here in Montana to Washington State, down to California and up to Alaska. Yeah, I mean, you get to see some of the most beautiful country in the West from 3,000 feet. And that's the best part of it. I read an interview with a Russian smoke jumper who they have got it a whole lot harder than us. I mean, they're making their own tools on the ground. But he said for smoke jumping is for 3 minutes, fly like eagle, for 3 weeks, dig like mole. And so those few minutes under canopy are the best part of the job.
I have Timothy Egan books, the Big Burn with
Uh,
Teddy Roosevelt and the Forest Service, and how much of that was established out here in the West
mhm.
because of big burns and wildfires. And truly, without folks like you, farmers would be hit hard, residents in their homes. But I mean, and forests, of course, would just rage out of control. Um, I'm sure seeing the Forest Service from the wildfire side and then navigating the bureaucracy, um, I mean, it would make you that kind of anger to see your friends get laid off, to see um, situations hurting for you. You said that you reached out to Zinke a couple of times, you didn't get anything. How, aside from that very clear indication, how else have you seen how he's been handling public lands or other issues like the Forest Service?
Yeah, I mean, that piece in particular, the way he has handled public lands or let other people handle them, has been one of the most frustrating things. I mean, I'm running to talk about housing and healthcare and childcare and how impossible it is becoming for a lot of people in this state, at least, to just get by working a full time job. But when it comes to public lands, I mean, yeah, Zinke has purported to be a public lands advocate. And a month ago, I got a flyer in the mail with a picture of him dressed up like Teddy Roosevelt, calling himself the Teddy Roosevelt of public lands. Meanwhile, well, they gut all of the agencies that actually manage and take care of those lands. And public lands are not just lines on a map. Public lands are a lot of people
Yeah.
working their tail off, often for a whole lot less than they're worth, to make sure that you can make it up a road to get to the trailhead and that you can actually make it up that trail to access the wilderness if you want to go stomp around or to go access the woods so that you can do some hunting. And when you gut the people who actually manage those lands, and when it's a quarter of the Forest Service here at least as much in the Park Service, about as much in the BLM, that ends up being a whole lot more insidious,
Yeah.
than the one little manufactured crisis that he helped create and then stand up as if he was solving of selling off a couple million acres. Because right now we're down a quarter in the Forest Service, and they're currently talking about pulling all of the wildland firefighters out of that agency. That's another third. And there's a whole nother round of early retirements going on. The next thing you know, we're going to end up with 20% of the people managing all the same acreage. And it's the same thing that they have done with public education. It's the same thing that they've done with what little public options we have when it comes to healthcare. They gut the service and then they turn around and point a finger and say, look, it's not working.
Right.
Well, now we got to privatize it because the public sector ain't doing it right. And then the next thing you know, well, I end up on a wildfire calling in retardant drops because we didn't properly manage this forest in advance. And us as taxpayers are paying $7,000 a drop out of a large air tanker that just happens to go to our US Senator, Tim Sheehy, who owns the private contracting company that profits from it. And that doesn't serve any of us. We all end up paying a whole lot more money and being a lot worse off for it.
It's absolutely, and it's in, like you said, these lands, that's what unites Montanans, right? And for so many different reasons, for tribal reasons, for farming and recreation hunting and just camping and families. I mean, you're from the Missoula area. I'm sure you're not doing smoke jumping anymore, but you're still going out with your friends. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
tell me, speaking of, how's the powder been over there?
Pretty lacking
Yeah,
this winter. Yeah, I've taken a day off every couple of weeks when I can, and I've managed for 2 of those days to make it up the Bitterroot Valley and do a little bit of backcountry skiing.
yeah,
There's still skiing, and at higher elevations, there's snow, but I have never seen a winter this warm and
yeah.
dry in Western Montana. I think a lot of people are seeing that, and it's distressing when you got a 70-degree day in late January
Hmm.
in Western Montana.
And then particularly as a smoke jumper, you're like, oh
Yeah.
god,
Well, yeah. Well, and I've been telling people, of all the winters to not have any time at all for skiing, I picked a pretty good one because I'm not having a whole lot of FOMO about a lot of powder
yeah,
days I'm missing. And of all the summers to miss firefighting and smoke jumping, well, I'm going to be missing a pretty busy summer. It looks like if things keep going this way because things are hot and they're dry, and we're seeing fires outside of Helena and a 200,000 acre fire
yeah,
in Oklahoma. Like it's not supposed to be this way. And instead of getting ready in advance, like we would be doing if we were good stewards of the land and the public resources, they're actively gutting the agencies and the people who would help us be better prepared for
yeah,
what's coming.
absolutely agree. And it's a major concern. I know in a few weeks, we'll have a Democratic primary, and that is something that over and over people are asking is there's public lands and then AI data centers.
Hmm.
Um, because that's another major water usage. Folks are complaining about electricity bills. What have you heard, or what is your stance on the AI data center?
Yeah, I mean, people are concerned. I'm concerned, right? We have proposals across the western side of the state, right here in Great Falls. I think there was one in Butte as well. And you know, on one hand, some of these provide really good paying union jobs, which there are a whole lot less of when they have ratcheted back all of the grants for construction and infrastructure. But on the other hand, man, at the end of the day, what these things really are their mines, right? These data centers are mining all of our data. They're scraping all of our personal information. And if they could do that in a way that is energy self sufficient and doesn't make worse the climate crisis that we're all living through right now, and is self sufficient in the water that they use and doesn't leave us all with less clean water and less clean air, well, shoot, then let's have a conversation. But
Yeah.
that should be the bare minimum for an industry that is raking in billions of dollars
Yeah.
with all of our personal data. And we all should be concerned about that. And the other thing I'll say, kind of the broader conversation, if they are mining all of our data, well, we ought to be getting some compensation for that
Yeah.
because it's just like the rest of the systems here. Somebody's getting filthy rich off of all of
Mhm.
this, and we're not getting anything
Yeah.
for it. And I actually think that we would probably see a lot more responsible development of, again, this technology that is literally existential to us
Mhm.
as a species if we had requirements in place that they actually compensate us for the data that they're making money off of.
And I like that you're connecting it back to the mines because if that's one thing that Montanans know much about, it's how the Copper Kings came through and with the copper mine and just what it did to the environment, the labor, the media, like how much power so many of these people Like, this is no stranger to Montana's history and even to some of my Appalachian followers. I just got back from checking out y'all's coal and everything. And that's not your question, it's the coal mining in Appalachia, but it is. There is a strong history of folks coming into states like Montana, like Virginia, and doing whatever they want. And I appreciate you again making that connection of the AI data centers and the mines, even though it's not the mining and, because I haven't heard that yet, that direct connection, so thanks.
And mining is a part of our history, right? I mean, a lot of this goes back to the rich history we've got here. You talked about the big burn and wildfire. I mean, modern wildland firefighting really has its roots
Yeah,
here in western Montana and in
yeah,
Missoula. A lot of logging in the rich history in this country started right here in western
yeah,
Montana. And also when it comes to mining, right? Like the second electrified city in the world was Butte,
mhm,
Montana. And it was from copper that was pulled out of the ground here. And at the time, we had some of the strongest union membership and strongest contracts in the country, right? We were at 50% union membership at one point in this state. And the people working in that mine built it on the fact that, you know what, if you die in a mine disaster, your wife and your kids and your family are going to be compensated and they're going to be taken care of because there were people putting their lives at risk for the things that this state depended on. And that's what a union's about. And that is also what a lot of this campaign is about is unions and our basic rights to organize are actively under attack as well. I mean, just yesterday I had my union NIFI forward me a memo from the Office of Personnel Management, which is a weedsy title here, but they had an executive order to strip away collective bargaining rights from over 1 million public employees
yeah,
at Veterans Affairs, at the Bureau of Land Management, 20 agencies, and there's a court injunction. And they sent out a memo this past week saying that they're not moving fast enough stripping away those folks' right to organize. And it had a collective bargaining termination spreadsheet and all for every agency director in the country. And actually, this is a chance for bipartisanship. In Congress, they passed a bill to Protect America's Workforce Act, the House of Representatives, to overturn that executive order and to protect collective bargaining. And that was bipartisan. It was 20 Republicans who voted for that thing, not ours, not Ryan Zinke. And he can't take a meeting. He can't stand up for our basic union rights. And like that's not just disregarding our rights. It's also disregarding the history of the state.
right, yeah, yeah, well, and, 'cause there's stories all over. I know that there's even, like, in Eastern, I know Missoula is typically seen as the hippie town of Montana,
Mhm.
but, I mean, unionizing is not as partisan, it was about the labor.
Mhm.
It feels it's been very partisan and politicized in the last couple decades, but historically, that the Democrats were for the working class, and so
Yeah.
I appreciate hearing you talk so much about, unions and regulation because, as mentioned, it's a core part of Montana's history. You mentioned earlier, that you care about Montans, you care about, people. When we were talking about public lands, you mentioned healthcare. Can you expand on that a little bit and what you're seeing?
Yeah. I mean, our healthcare system is broken. And actually, I think that most Montanans would agree with that statement, regardless of what political party they voted for this last time around. And if you want an example, just look at what you are looking at. If you're someone like me who right now I'm uninsured because I had to leave smoke jumping to run for this office. So I'm looking at the health insurance marketplace.
Mhm.
And the cheapest plan I can find is, in the $900 range. And you got a $12,000 deductible. So you're paying, near $1,000 a month for health insurance that doesn't actually get you health care until you spend 12,000 more. That is not a functioning system. And I could tell you, I'm sure you have stories of the same. Like this is not something that actually serves working people or most people. And there are examples of functioning systems, and there are examples right here in this country. Actually, most of the people I talk to on Medicare are generally pretty pleased
Mm,
with the health coverage that they get from that. And there are holes when it comes to vision and dental, which ought to be part of real health coverage. And there are holes when it comes to what they're doing to public lands, what they did there when they created Medicare Advantage and tried to privatize that. But man, I don't know anybody on Medicare that would be jumping at the chance to buy into United Health Insurance.
mm.
And I know a whole lot of people like me who ended up stuck on health insurance from United or some other insurance corporation that's raking in profits here, who would jump at the chance to buy into Medicare if they had the darn option. So let's give everybody the option. And if private health insurance corporations have a better product that can outcompete it, I would love to know where they've been keeping that for the last 20 or 30 years because I haven't
Funny.
seen it.
Right, funny, isn't it? Well, and absolutely, I'm glad that you're also praising Medicare too, because there's so many different ways that people are presenting. There's single payer, there's universal, there's Medicare, and that's what's important is that regardless of how or what path, making sure that at least on and the audience that I'm representing is that we're calling out that it's broken. Like
Hmm.
it's not sustainable. Um, and then it also, it ties into, like you said, with the housing and affordability here.
Hmm.
There's so many folks not being able to make it. Um, and can you speak a little bit to housing and affordability? I know we briefly touched on it, but if we could return, what stories are you hearing and what moves you about that?
Yeah. I mean, to the point that you just made, I think that just starting from the place of acknowledging the fact that these systems are broken is so powerful, right? I would offer that the genius of Donald Trump, which is a hell of a way to start a sentence, was that he told people one truth,
Yeah,
which is that the system is broken. And if you live in a housing market like I do in Missoula, where, at my seventh year as a smoke jumper, I'm making $19 an hour, and there are guys making the same wage 20 years in, and you can't find a home for less than $500,000 in the community where you live, that is not a functioning housing system.
yeah,
And it's worse if you go to Gallatin County or if you go to Flathead County. And we are in a housing crisis. That's what that means. And again, I think almost anyone in the state would tell you that, whether you already own a home or not, if your rent has tripled or quadrupled in the last 10 years. And we've been in a housing crisis before. We fixed the housing crisis after World War II when we had a whole generation of people moving
yeah.
back to this country after World War II, ready to build families and to buy homes. And you know what we did? The federal government stepped in on a bipartisan basis in 1950 and invested billions of 1950s dollars to build hundreds of thousands of units of homes. And we created the low income housing voucher program. And your history. So, there's all sorts of flaws to the ways that we did that. And we concentrated poverty, but we have an even better set of tools we could be using right now, like community land trusts and deed restricted housing. And we could be stepping in to make sure that a developer can actually make it pencil out to build dense housing where we need it so that they don't go 5 miles outside of town and
Mm,
build a 5 bedroom home on 2 acres because that doesn't get us the sort of housing stock that we need.
right.
I mean, that's what the federal government's actually for, from my understanding. When the market's not meeting a need, we came together and created government to make sure that we have institutions that can step in
Right.
and help meet that need. And our basic needs for housing and healthcare, let alone childcare, are not being met.
No, and that is the other thing about childcare is, when you start looking at the childcare crisis, how coming together as a community using your government to maybe it's to address childcare, but then suddenly, like, how small businesses or employers benefit from childcare because now they're not worried about parents missing work for like it benefits everybody.
Hmm.
And here in Montana, like there is that rugged individualism, but again, over and over, we have history of coming together for when it matters
Yeah.
and when we can be pragmatic. This is a little Montana fun fact, but I was reading about women's property ownership and just rights out here. And one of
Mhm.
the reasons that women were able to buy property before other women in other states could was because there was such a low tax base that if those women who followed husbands out here and those husbands died out in the Montana wilderness, which they did back in the day, um, if those women weren't legally entitled to have the property, it meant they were wards of the state. And Montanans didn't want to pay for that. They were like, no, like, we're not going to put a woman on welfare if she's perfectly capable of having her own home. And it was just, it's really profound that, there is and then again later we elected Jeanette Rankin. So, it it's just different the way that Montanans approach individualism and individual rights while also having a deep, sense of community. And,
Hmm.
I think you're talking about that especially, in all the different ways that we can come together. Um, so I just wanted to comment and appreciate it. I didn't mean to derail everyone. We'll get back to the interview, unless you want to comment on
No, absolutely. Yeah,
that.
we're right in line. I mean, I hope this ain't inappropriate. I remember one of my supervisors, one of my crew leads in fire, who's a Northern Idaho boy, but I actually lived here in Great Falls for quite a while. And we're sitting there on day 14 and he's at the bar and he says, "Listen here, Sam," because I did organizing, working between fire seasons. Not a lot of other firefighters did. I said, I am ready. The day is long. If you try to take my guns, I will shoot you in the face. But we don't spend enough on education. And he went on a 5-minute rant about how like young kids are getting short shrifted when they go to a public school where they don't get the resources they need, or where a teacher, today is got a starting salary of $41,000 a year, right? And that is the mix of individualism and taking care of yourself we got here in Montana, but also pulling over if you see someone in a ditch to pull them out,
Right.
right? Like that. That is the Montana I know. It's we help each other out,
Yeah.
and that's the way that we used to run this state, and actually a lot of this country. And we can do that again.
And there's like such a basic, like, even for me, I don't education taxes just don't bother me, personally, because whoever I want my community to be smart, intelligent. Like when
Yeah,
I go to a doctor, I want if he is from my town and is now a doctor, I want to, yeah, I know that your public school taught you well. If
yeah,
there's like selfish benefits to providing for all. And um, I also think, a hard thing about Montana is because of lack of opportunity, we have a lot of folks that leave, and
hmm
the brain drain, and showing more commitment to taking care of ourselves might prevent some of that brain drain
yeah,
because you're just not going to get that kind of treatment anywhere else.
hmm
I want to go back. We talked about education. Talk about your experience at University of Montana. What were
yeah,
you studying, and what were you involved in?
yeah. I mean, I'll tell. My dad is a public school teacher, so I have great appreciation for how hard that can be and how hard it can be to get by on public school teachers' wages a lot of the
Mhm.
time. But at the university, I studied philosophy and political science, which is a great degree to get to, end up digging ditches in the woods, which is what I did with it. But truly, it,
Oh,
it
nice.
it it helped me on a foundational level, and it informs the way that I think about all these things,
Yeah.
right? And the beauty of a public education is that if you go to a public college or university, you are there with everybody else.
Right.
And there's everyone from the folks whose parents are, have worked hard enough and fortunate enough to help them pay for school and pay for their housing, to people like me who, yeah, at one point was working 3 jobs at a time and finishing up a night shift at Subway and having to go figure out how I'm going to finish my homework or pay for books. And that is a beautiful thing,
Yeah.
because we created these public institutions, these public colleges and universities, so that the sons of bankers and farmers and ranchers and miners could all come to the same place and get an education and have that shared language and foundation. And that has the implications that has for how we conduct ourselves in civil society are massive and so positive. And that is something that's getting further out of reach for a lot of people. It was barely in reach for me if I'm working 3 jobs at a time, and these things have not gotten easier for people. And now you're paying 3 times as much for rent while you're trying to get by.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's just um, and it's a madhouse. And like, it's enough, and let's validate it. It's enough to have people sharpen pitchforks. They're sick of seeing just gratuitous wealth. They're seeing it feels very let them eat cake kind. It's
Yeah.
just there's and Montanans are reasonable. We understand if you make money, you have a product and you sell it, you should earn a product. We're not, but when you start dominating, if you're not giving back to that sense of community, there's something sick and selfish that we just don't like.
Yeah. And I mean, at a fundamental level, a big part of what pushed me to do this and to take this leap is I looked at who is actually in Congress right now and who we are left with as leaders. Right. I mean, Ryan Zinke is one example. The guy's $20 million richer since assuming office. But the average net worth of a congressperson right now is $3 to $4 million, depending on the day and depending on how good the stock market is doing that day, unfortunately. And that is not the average worth of somebody here in Montana. Like, that is not reflective of the lived experience of most people here in this state. And the average age of a congressperson is 56 or 58 years old. And actually, the older of those two parties is the Democratic Party in Congress. Well, at the end of the day, the lived experience of those people does not reflect that of us.
Mm,
And if you don't know what it's like to be working 3 jobs at a time and still end up paying your rent on a credit card, well, you might be a little less passionate about fixing the housing crisis yesterday, like we need to.
yeah.
And if you don't know what it's like to, tear your calf on a fire and limp off 3 days later, and then drive to the only orthopedist in town and find out that it's out of network, and so you're paying it out of pocket, and to feel viscerally what a broken healthcare system looks like, well, you might be more willing to just kind of nibble around the edges to fix that thing. But again, like whether that you are my friends or coworkers who voted Democrat last year or voted for the Republicans, like the system is not working for any of us.
Right.
And it's a point of consensus, and it feels hopeless because it's so bad. But the hopeful thing is we all agree.
Mhm.
So all we got to do is make sure they can't turn us against each other, and just unite around these basic things that we can all agree on, and focus on them, and then focus on the shit that we can't agree on later.
And that is something too that we're seeing. It's a very interesting campaign, not just race or just time,
Hmm.
um, because it seems like a lot of things are shifting in response to the national news and headlines. One thing that has surprised me is how many Montanans on both sides of the divide have come out against um, how ICE is being handled. Very two-way friendly folks questioning ICE. Can you speak a little bit to the ICE and immigration crisis?
Yeah, I mean, the day Alex Preddy was murdered, I was up in Troy, sitting outside a coffee shop, or I guess it was the day after, but the day I got that news, and I watched that video, I ended up being 15 minutes late because I couldn't talk, right? Like
Yeah.
anybody who saw that, like it's not just your sensibilities, like it was like outrage and sadness at the same time.
Mhm.
And what I saw in that video was 6 federal employees, people who are supposed to be public servants, working on the public dime, kicking the hell out of somebody and then murdering him in cold blood in the streets. That person just happened to be an American citizen. It doesn't matter if he's a citizen, right? Nobody's allowed to do that. And when I watch that video, there is one person standing up for our First Amendment. There's one person who's standing up for our Fourth Amendment right against search and seizure, or our Second Amendment. And it's none of the people who are supposed to be public servants in that video. It's the guy who got killed. And we should expect so much better from our government. And a story I've told folks is when I was a squad leader on the fire crew, if we're rolling through Great Falls and stopping at a gas station, I would turn around and I'd tell them, keep your shit tight because you represent all of us
Right.
when you walk into that place.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're buying chicken strips or enforcing the law.
Right.
And clearly nobody is telling these people that. So, I mean, there's a fundamental structural problem there that needs to be addressed. And man, you lose a controlled burn in New Mexico and they shut down prescribed fire for the year, and someone gets murdered in American streets, and we don't see any sort of oversight or accountability. We should all be so mad about that, and we shouldn't have to stand for it.
And there's been so much outrage, different things across the state with how they're going to handle it, um, and it'll be interesting to, as this continues, to see how individual Montana cities respond. Sorry, it sounded like you.
No,
Okay.
that's all I got. No,
Uh, but I want to circle back real quick to touch on it. You talked about how particularly members of Congress have not been relatable either financially or lived experience or whatever. And then on the other hand, there's also on from the national, you are getting a lot of national attention for your relationship with the Bernie Bros. Can you speak a little bit about that?
yeah, yeah. I mean, so this past, I think it was April, we were just a couple months into the Doge cuts, where the literal richest man in the world was firing en masse a whole lot of working people in my union. And on Valentine's Day of last year, they fired 300 Forest Service employees just in Montana. And when we finally got the numbers 2 months later, 85% of them were GS6s or below. That's people making less than 1970 an hour, swinging tools in the woods, largely. And so after reaching out to Zinke's office multiple times, talking to his chief of staff at one point, saying, "Oh yeah, well I'll get you his number." Well, I couldn't get a hold of our congressional representative. The best representation we got was the senator from Vermont who flew out to host a rally in Missoula and to give working people a voice.
Yeah.
So I gave a speech there, and it was so inspiring and hopeful because it was a Wednesday afternoon at 1 o'clock, and a lot of us felt like we were alone, right? Nobody cared, and 9,000 people showed up. Like 9,000 people cared at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday, and that honestly felt like a complete shift in not just the narrative, but in like the way Montanans are showing up for each other, just like we always have. So yeah, when I launched this campaign, Senator Sanders endorsed, and it's not just him; it's also about 2 dozen state legislators, right? And 3 of those are Republicans. So that's the only way we fix this thing. We don't fix it by just making everybody more angry at the other party and saying you ought to hate them more than you hate us, and that's why you vote for us this time, because we don't get out of this doing that. We got to actually figure out how to talk to other people. And if we can't talk to people who voted Republican as well, we're not going to win the damn election.
Mhm.
And also, we're not going to deliver on fixing big problems like housing and healthcare because we can't do it on our own. It's going to take all of us coming together to do that. And, actually, they still are able to do that at the Montana legislature sometimes. And we should have a representative who's willing to work with people in both parties and to buck their own party when they're messing up because both parties have left working people behind
Yeah.
for decades now.
And that's the truth is, I read a stat this morning that was something like somewhere between 25 and 30% of people are just outright done with both, like, they're just done.
Yeah.
Like, figure out a new way, like, quit parroting the party and just, like, talk about your campaign and let the people vote, and I just think that it's
Yeah.
it's a really, it's a natural response to everything going on, and, I'm glad that 9,000, that's really inspiring.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah. It
cool.
was also terrifying in the moment, but here we are.
Well, we're kinda heading towards the end here. I wanna give you an opportunity. You talked about why you think that, you could do a better job than Zinke.
Mhm.
Without bad mouthing or anything, what makes you stand out against your candidates, your fellow candidates?
Yeah. Here in a primary, and there are four amazing folks running. And it should also be cause for hope
Mhm.
that there are four people dedicating their lives to getting people excited and to activating people and bringing them together. The thing that makes me unique here in the primary here in Montana, and actually among the sort of candidates that we've had the option of as Montanans, is I know what it's like to swing a tool,
Yeah.
sometimes for 1,000 hours of overtime for the other 2 years worth of hours in 1 year, and still end up spending 80% of my income just to keep a roof over my head in a little, not even 1,000 square foot house. And that is most Montanans' experience. That is not the experience of most people
Yeah.
representing us in Congress. And I was a leader in my union. And this is a state that was built on union work and organizing in large part. And we have not had a union member running for federal office for Congress in this state in over a decade. And you look up and you wonder, well, why are half of our union members voting Republican? Well, it's because we haven't offered folks somebody who knows what it's like to be on the ground in a union, standing up for your brothers and sisters. And I tell you, the last thing here too is outside of fire seasons, I have been working as an organizer and an advocate for everything from civil liberties to housing to healthcare and homeless shelters in between seasons for the better part of a decade, and helped work to get about a dozen bills passed into law at the state level here. And that was with Republicans and Democrats. And that is actually what it's going to take to fix these things, right? Is we need to be able to talk to people from both parties. That's why I've got legislators from both parties supporting me in this. And, that's why I want to start from the place of saying, you know what, if you are like, some of my friends or coworkers who say voted for Donald Trump last year, you don't deserve to be belittled for that decision because if you're making 19 bucks an hour as a firefighter in a place where you can't get a house for less than $500,000, well, your life did not improve materially over the
Right.
preceding 4 years when Democrats were in control. And if government is not making your life materially better and you vote for the party out of power, well, that's actually how democracy
Yeah.
works. So let's start from that place and say that we don't need to belittle people who voted the other way. We need to say you were right in a lot of regards to be frustrated with the fact that your life was getting materially worse, and that is what government is for. And government can still do that. We can still fix big problems. We just got to bring working people together and young people together and union members together and everybody who still cares about our Constitution and basic civil liberties. And that right there is a working coalition that can still fix big things.
And I appreciate you talking about working across, the political divide and your union lobbying, and already having that experience. Can you also talk a little bit about, your any work you've had with, tribal, or indigenous organizations, lands, and, whether smoke jumping or otherwise?
Yeah, on the one hand, we have the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes just north of Missoula. We end up, when we're lucky, getting to jump fires up there and put them out, God willing. In between fire seasons, in 2021, I worked for the American Civil Liberties Union of Montana, and part of that was defending basic hunting and fishing rights, which is not always the easiest thing to do in the Montana state legislature up there, and defending basic water rights that might be under attack. And largely, defending voting rights.
Yeah.
One of the Republicans who's supporting me here, her name's Jerry Custer. She was a county clerk over in Forsyth, Montana, a Republican legislator. And Jerry actually knew what it took and what it looked like to oversee elections and to carry that out. So she wasn't willing to back legislation where you're taking away people's ability to use a tribal ID, for instance, to access voting,
Yeah.
or legislation to get rid of satellite offices that a lot of folks in remote areas and reservations rely on to access their basic right to vote. So, Jerry and I got to join with a whole lot of other people and fight back against those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Well,
sort of experience I got there.
and thank you. And folks, this has been awesome for me. I hope this is a great interview for you guys. For those who's listening, love your message. How can they donate or learn more? Where can they go?
Thank you. I always forget that part. The website is samformontana.com, all spelled out. And right up top, if you're here in Montana, front and center is a link to volunteer. And that is how we fix this thing, is we actually got to get feet on the ground and work. And to the right of that is a link to donate. And this is a people powered campaign. I'm not taking corporate PAC money, and it takes money to organize and to fuel this thing and to schlep all the way out here. So please pitch in if you can. And if you want to follow us on socials, it's just at Sam Forstag, whatever platform you look us up. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, this was awesome. Folks, I gotta know, what did you think? Tell me. Leave it in the
Yeah.
comments. And we've had a few interviews with Montana political candidates, and we're getting close. So let me know in the comments what you thought about Sam. If you have any other comments or anything, please. I don't know. I gotta be able to answer and talk with you guys. Like, follow, subscribe. You know the drill. Make sure to share it. Share it with your mom, your dad, your sister, that one crazy aunt. You never know. Folks, this is Sam Forstag, Sam for Montana, running for Montana Congress over in the O1 and out of Missoula. So
Yeah.
thanks for joining me, Sam.
Thanks,
You're
Lee.
welcome.
Thanks, everybody.
See you later. I'll see you next time. Bye.